Can you hear me now? There we go. Woo, right. Woo, woo. All right, you guys are the best. Cool. Yeah, you'll see me in the little corner here. And you can see me too. Cool. All right, we're good to go. This is awesome. I'm going to be going back and forth between the slides and the video here. So we'll essentially, we'll have a little bit of this action. I'll show you. So we'll have the stop slide presentation, and then I'll be here. I'll be kind of coming in and out, and then we'll go back to the slide presentation to make sure that it's all working. So,
do you want to hear mic stuff?
Yeah, and then I'm going to take off the mic stuff. We tried to do it and make it all cool and sexy and high tech, but at least we have the video. The video is what matters most.
Yeah.
The audio is secondary. Okay, we got that, Maria. And that's Maria, who you're seeing. Maria's going to help. If you guys could all just say hi to Maria. And I'm going to be in the chat box here as well. It is a real plant. Yeah, I'm at the WeWork that I usually go to. And if you could just write in, a lot of you have already done this, but just write in where you're from. So where you're from, your name, where you're from, why you're interested in microdosing. And then we also have a team member who's based out of London. Her name is Nia, and Nia will be moderating the chat forum for the webinar today. So Nia, if you could just also say hello and introduce yourself. She's actually one of our newest team members at Third Wave, and will be providing support for all of you. So I just want to do one more check to make sure that everything is good to go. Cool, y'all are coming in. We have about 560 people here. Love this, love this, love this. And then, great. Okay, we're all set. If you guys are ready, I'm ready. I'm ready to jump in and dive in to the webinar today. So welcome to Microdosing 2.0, upgraded and personalized. My name is Paul Austin. I'm the founder and CEO of Third Wave. And before we get into the deep details of the webinar today, I want to first off acknowledge that this webinar marks our 5-year anniversary as a company. So back in September 2015, this would have been, I think, September 1st, 2015 is when I bought the domain name thirdwavepsychedelics.com. We later switched to the thirdwave.co and essentially started to publish and produce content around psychedelics. Now, the story of how this happened is actually pretty interesting. So I was living in Budapest at the time. This was, again, I think the story took place was July 2015. And I had two friends who were visiting me, one whose name was Yuri and Nico. And we essentially were taking acid, as one does in Budapest, both higher doses and microdosing, and going to these third wave coffee shops, which are the really beautiful artisanal coffee shops that you can go and get like a nice, latte or cappuccino, there's a swan on top, these sorts of things. And so we're taking LSD and having these really beautiful, profound experiences and going to third wave coffee shops and then just talking about where psychedelics were headed. And again, this was back in 2015. This was back before there were tens of millions of dollars coming into venture capital. This was back before a lot of the current research has been published, although there was still significant research at this time, before Michael Pollan's book. It was right around the same time that actually Tim Ferriss was starting to publish podcasts about psychedelics on his platform. And we wanted to create an idea, a narrative around the integration of psychedelics into mainstream culture. And so we came up with this idea of the third wave, which is basically an integration of the first wave and the second wave of psychedelics. The first wave being the indigenous, ancient use of these medicines, thinking about the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, and thinking about the use of ayahuasca in the Amazon, and soma, which was a beverage they drank in India, which is written about in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, right? There's a lot of wisdom in that use over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And there's also a lot of knowledge and precision in the second wave of psychedelics, which was the 50s and 60s, when thousands of clinical papers were published about the efficacy of psychedelics to treat a wide range of conditions. And this third wave of psychedelics is about the integration of those two, right? The wisdom, narrative and stories, and the precision of the scientific method. But unlike the second wave, which ended up sort of spiraling into chaos, and there was an unfortunate backlash. And from my perspective, it wasn't the fault of Timothy Leary or the Eternal the Brotherhood or any of the groups. It was purely, we lived in an unfortunate time period where, there was a war on drugs and a lot going on that way. So it didn't work out. And there were still lessons that we could learn from that second wave, right? And so this third wave is about both and. That's how I always love to describe it, both and. Both individual use of psychedelics for healing and transformation and collective knowledge that comes from that to lead us to create better systems and processes, right? And for me, and what we focused on at Third Wave for this entire period has been how is microdosing the, so to say, carrot on the stick, right? If Timothy Leary was dousing everyone in acid back in the 60s, which a lot of people say that's why it, sort of spiraled out of control, how can microdosing, which is basically subperceptual, as a way to onboard us into the mystical elements of the psychedelic experience, how can that be sort of a bridge between mainstream culture and the beauty and profundity and the mystery and the awe that comes from these profound transcendent experiences on high doses of psychedelics? So that's more or less how I view this concept and how we view this concept of microdosing. It's a bridge between worlds, essentially. So with all that being said, I'm going to go back to the chat box. What I would love to hear from all of you is just a little bit first, how long have you known about the third wave? Because I'm very, very curious about that. If this is the first webinar you've attended, less than 6 months, for the last 12 to 18 months, for 3 to 4 years now. So just go ahead and let us know how long you've known about the third wave. This is great. So we have 40% of you who are first timers. We have about 20% of you who have known about us for less than 6 months. So about 60% of you in total are fairly new to third wave and what we're about. But then we also have 15% of you. So that's, I would say 50 to 60 people who have known about us for a long time. So I want to both acknowledge and honor all of you who are new here today for coming, for taking a step in the right direction, for your growth, for your development, for your process towards freedom and mastery. And I also want to acknowledge the homies who have been around for a while, who have come back, who have been attending webinars, who have been with us for a longer period of time. And again, it's the both and. It's the people who are brand new to this and those who have been around the block for a while. So I just want to thank all of you for attending the webinar today. One more poll before we get into the meat of the curriculum today, and that's, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, reset the poll. If you've microdosed before, just a simple yes, no question, have you microdosed before? Oh, this is cool. This is really cool. So 70% of you have microdosed before, and about 30% of you have not microdosed. That might be 2/3 to a third. Let's say 2/3 to a third. So about 2/3 of you have microdosed before, and about a third of you have never microdosed before. And that's actually a really good sign for today's webinar, because today's webinar is all about upgrading and personalizing your experience. For a lot of people who are new to microdosing, it's really, the basics of it are pretty easy. And we'll get into that a little bit later while we get deeper into the webinar. We're going to talk about generic protocols and prescriptive protocols versus trial and error in terms of finding what works best for you. But again, before we get into the advanced stuff, I want to review a couple things briefly about microdosing so that we're all on the same page about what microdosing actually is. Boom. Quick note on personal responsibility. So when you're microdosing, please act responsibly. Please choose your words wisely, and please consider the bigger picture. Psilocybin and LSD are still illegal. So that's just a good thing to review. We have this in our course as well. And then this is the basic overview of what, I want to cover in the webinar today. 30 Wave's 5-year anniversary, which we already spoke about, microdosing basics, how microdosing is a skill, peak performance for the soul, my personal container for microdosing, which is going to help to create a scaffolding for all of you who have been doing microdosing for a longer period of time, why coaching, and then towards the end of the class today, we'll talk about our Microdosing Course 2.0 and the new membership site that we have built in, and we have a special launch price offer for that as well for those of you who want to get access to Third Wave's protocol. So as some of you may know, Stamets has a protocol, Paul Stamets, Jim Fadiman has created a protocol, and Third Wave hasn't really come out with our specific protocol yet. And essentially that's a big part of what we're announcing and launching today in the webinar. So basics of microdosing first. But even before we get into that, let's go ahead and review this quote. What is the first step towards mastery? And this comes from Robert Greene's book, Mastery. So you possess a kind of inner force that seeks to guide you towards your life's task, what you are meant to accomplish in the time you have to live. The first move towards mastery is always inward, learning who you really are and reconnecting with that innate force. Knowing it with clarity, you will find your way to the proper path and everything else will fall into place. It is never too late to start this process. So a kind of inner force, I like to compare that to Star Wars and the Jedi, right? We have a force, a life force that we all work with, basically what comes from our soul. If we strip away the distractions and the conditioning and the stories that we've told ourselves for many, many years, we're able to better tap into that inner force. And the first move for that is always going inwards, right? We're taught so often that we need to look for validation, that we need to look for love, that we need to look for all these things externally, when in truth, that really is a process of turning inwards and reconnecting with ourselves. And then once we know that, things tend to align and emerge as they need to align and emerge. And I think the last part is prevalent and relevant for everyone here, whether you're 19 and a college student or in your 70s and looking at microdosing to help with a little bit more energy, that it is never too late to start this process towards mastery. So what is microdosing? So microdosing is consuming a sub-perceptible amount of a psychedelic for a consistent period of time with a specific intention or purpose to improve cognitive function and emotional well-being. Typically, this means for LSD, a microdose is between 6 and 20 micrograms, which is between a 16th and a 5th of a single tab. And for psilocybin mushrooms, a microdose is between 0.2 grams and 0.5 grams. And to be honest, sometimes with psilocybin mushrooms, especially for those who have higher sensitivity, it could be as low as 0.1 gram. And I think this last part here on the right, to maximize the benefits and results of microdosing, it's best to think of microdosing as a protocol. So what I gave as an example here is Jim Fadiman's protocol. You dose on day 1, you do not have a dose day 2, no dose day 3, and then you dose again on day 4. You do that twice a week for 5 weeks, so 10 dose days in total. And this is what we'll continue to refer to microdosing as a protocol. Microdosing isn't just taking a little bit of acid once or a little bit of mushrooms once. It's really a process of consistently working with the medicine and starting to build and develop a relationship with it so that you understand how you can best utilize it in combination with diet, exercise, sleep, yoga, meditation, breath work, creative flow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into some of those specifics here in a little bit. And what are some of the benefits that people experience from microdosing? So we notice that people have a reduction or alleviation of depressive symptoms. We notice that people have an increase in feelings of determination, alertness, and energy. that they have fewer negative emotions and dysfunctional attitudes, that there's an improved mood and focus, more wisdom, open-mindedness, and creativity. There's been some research that's been done that shows that LSD is having an effect even as low as 6.5 micrograms. And there are general behavioral improvements that include improving anxiety, helping to integrate a meditative practice, and kickstarting some sort of exercise. So let's get into the first major element of the 2.0 webinar today, and that is that microdosing is a skill. And I'm going to pop back to the full video here because I want to talk about this for a little bit. So we know that there are generic protocols. We also know the importance of mindfulness, and we want to test and iterate with no prescriptions. So what does that mean? So for the last 5 years, we've had two main protocols, so to say, that have been elevated and have been talked about. The first one is Jim protocol, which we just reviewed right before this, where essentially you're taking a microdose 2 times a week for a period of 5 weeks, and then you take usually a week to a month break before engaging with the substance again. And then we also have Paul Stamets protocol, right? And with Paul Stamets protocol, he initially had it as 5 times a week and then 2 days off, and has since switched it to 4 days a week on, 3 days off. The Jim protocol, from my perspective, appears to be more suited for those who are struggling with clinical conditions. And the Paul Stamets protocol, again, appears to be geared more towards people who are interested in wellness, interested in it as a nootropic, interested in it as performance. Now, the thing is, with any sort of prescriptive protocol, whether it's the Jim protocol or the Paul Stamets protocol, or any other sort of like, here's a prescription from a doctor, a psychiatrist, a medical professional, even a therapist, the challenge often with these prescriptions in our medical system has been a one-size-fits-all approach. So in traditional pharmaceuticals, what that means is if you're struggling with depression, they give you Prozac or Lexapro. If you're struggling with anxiety, they might give you Xanax, or they might give you some other sort of pill to help with that. If you have ADHD, then they'll give you Ritalin, or just, like whatever other, ADHD medication. Adderall is another one. And it's basically like, rely on the pill. This pill will sort of fix your issue. You don't need any other help besides that. And the thing that psychedelics represent, and I think in particular microdosing represents, is a total switch of that system, where instead of giving up our power and our agency to a supposed authority figure who supposedly knows what's best for us, we instead take the personal responsibility of wanting to improve our own health and our own well-being, and we customize our medicinal protocols and our protocols for wellness and health towards what we need as individuals. And that's, of course, the downside of these generic protocols. They're great when talked about in media pieces, or they're great when talked about in a book or on a podcast, because they provide a little bit of a container, a basic container for people to get started with microdosing, which is super important. But after, again, you've started to build a relationship with this, you'll notice that your specific issue, the reason why you're microdosing, is specific for you. Because, like we all talk about, you're a super unique snowflake. You're very special, and you need something that works just for you. So that's what we're going to dive a little bit deeper into, is how do you customize that protocol, right? How do you make sure that it's geared best for you? And more importantly, what are you doing in addition to microdosing to help ensure that microdosing is useful, that it's beneficial, and that it's continuing to propel you down the right path, down the correct path, down that path towards the inner knowing, the inner force, that process of mastery, personal mastery, that many of us are so interested in continuing to seek and continuing to go after. So what is the customization of those protocols? So the way that I'm going to explain that and describe that, because I don't want to get too deep in the weeds yet, I want to start more from a metaphysical perspective. And so as a way to inform this entire conversation, we're going to talk about how microdosing is a skill, right? Psychedelic use is a skill. In other words, the first time that I did mushrooms, I was 19, it was 10 years ago. I did 2 dried grams of magic mushrooms in my fraternity house over a winter break that I snuck into with 2 friends because my dad worked at the university that I went to, so I had a private dorm there. Right? Not ideal setting. I didn't do any sort of preparation. We just crushed them up in the basement. It's the middle of winter. We did about 2 grams. We threw Pink Floyd's The Wall on a big projector and then just sort of like had our experience in this huge cottage fraternity house when I was 19. I had other experiences that were more and more interesting, but obviously the way that I've done mushrooms now, so the most recent mushroom experience that I had was 3 grams of golden teachers with 2 friends in a private setting with a curated playlist. We prepared for a week beforehand. We did some journaling before. We took work off so we could clear the space, and then we had a slight brief integration circle afterwards in time for the next week to integrate what had come up. So even my own process, from where I was 10 years ago to where I am now, my way to work with psychedelics has completely changed. And that's what I want to emphasize more than anything. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, take this. That microdosing and psychedelic use is a skill. It's something that we can improve upon. It's something that we can get better at. And it's something that we can integrate as an adjunct to help us towards our path of personal mastery. Microdosing is a skill. That's really important to clarify. So the next thing that I want to jump into is a little bit of a philosophical framework for thinking about microdosing and psychedelic use, how we upgrade and personalize these to what we want, and thinking about it from the most sort of high-end perspective as possible. And the way that I want to do that is by showing you a video clip. And this video clip comes from the TV show Vikings, which is one of my absolute favorite TV shows. For any of you who have seen Game of Thrones and you enjoy history, historical fiction, I highly recommend watching Vikings. It's a mythical story about a man named Ragnar Lothbrok, who basically was the first Viking to venture out and find England and conquered England, and then came back to Norway and Scandinavia, eventually became king. And the scene that I'm about to show you is Ragnar on the way to his death. And he's back in England, and the king that he had first invaded, King Ella, I think King Ella is his name, who's the king of Northumbria. He's on his way to King Ella to be put to death. And he's having a conversation with the seer, which is sort of the oracle of his village, about the way that Ragnar was able to have total power, control, and agency over the way that he chose to live his life. So I want to play this clip because I think it'll be a super, super powerful clip for everyone.
Where are we?
I don't know. We do better to ask the horses. They know.
You're blind.
Sure am. But the horses know the way. But don't worry. I can see you, Ragnar Lothbrok. I can see you.
When will we reach King Alis?
Not until tomorrow.
It will be at least another day before I am put to death. You and your gods are wrong. You see, I guided my fate. I fashioned the course of my life and my death. Me. Not you, not the gods. Me. It was my idea to come here to die.
You believe that, so it is true to you?
I don't believe in the gods' existence. Man is the master of his own fate, not the gods. The gods are man's creation to give answers that they are too afraid to give themselves.
You may be right, Ragnar Lothbrok. I am only the seer. I have walked among the lowest of the dead, and I have groped for meaning. And I may have been wrong.
What did you say?
I didn't say anything.
So that is in season 4, the second part of season 4. And it's one of the most powerful scenes that I've ever experienced within a TV show. And what speaks to me so much about that is this sense of freedom that Ragnar has. In other words, he is fully embodied. He is fully and has been able to fully pursue his path of mastery. The way he did that is up for debate. But he did things on his terms, how he wanted to do it, when he wanted to do it. And I think there's nothing more empowering than that, because so often, especially now, like with COVID, with all of the chaos that's going around in our existence right now, it's very easy to get distracted and pulled away. It's very easy to think that we don't have control, that we don't have agency, that we just sort of have to release and surrender. And I think it is true that surrender is important. It's true to be able to let go and see things as they emerge. But just as important is to have this sort of drive and determination and this will, right, this will to power, to live at the highest level that we have chosen to live. And I think what Ragnar sort of explained there is that the gods didn't decide when he would die, that no one decided when he would die, that he basically manifested this himself. And that's what's so great about psychedelics. And that's what's so great about microdosing in particular, is these are tools of manifestation. And these are tools of magicians. And if we go into them with a clear understanding of where we are right now and how we want to continue to grow and develop as we move forward, then we can shape the path of our existence. So for a little context, I want to tell you a little bit more about my own story, because that will tie in well to the personalized protocol. So essentially, I grew up in West Michigan. I grew up in a small suburb town, 15,000 people. It's called Granville. You can look it up. It's on the outskirts of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is a small city of about 100,000 people. My dad works at a university in an admin position. My mom's a social worker. I have 2 sisters who are married, who are both still living in West Michigan. And I came from a very sheltered existence. You know, I came from a place where I wasn't allowed to do much, where I lived basically in a little bubble, where sort of the normative way of living was you go and get your bachelor's, you know, you go and maybe get an MBA or get a corporate job, or you know, maybe go to graduate school for something else. I was on a very sort of traditional path. And the reason I'm communicating this is because when I started to work with psychedelics, when I was 19, 20, and 21, in an intentional way, through those experiences, it became very clear that I could let go of that story and evolve further out of it. That it became very clear that by going inwards through psychedelic use, that I had a gift to give, and I wanted to be placed in a position where I could fully give it. So freedom for my 20s has been this defining sort of definition. Now, when I was 21, I moved to Turkey, where I taught English for a year. I lived in Thailand for about a year. I lived in Lisbon, I lived in Oaxaca, in Mexico, and essentially from the age of 21 to 27, traveled to 60 different countries, did it while building my first online business, had basically no financial support outside of what I was creating for myself, and just felt called to pursue this path. And this whole time, it's been difficult. There's been suffering. There's been a lot of perseverance. There's been a lot of beautiful stories through that process. Third wave emerged in 2015. And it just felt like the right thing to do. It felt like if we were going to overcome this existential crisis, if we were going to fully be able to deal with the chaos that was coming, because even back 10 years ago when I first started working with psychedelics, the climate crisis was clear, the mental health crisis was clear. Everything that's now sort of coming to a head today in 2020 has been clear and obvious for the last 10 years. And it's only because of something like COVID that we're finally facing this sort of disgusting underbelly shadow side that we've refused to face. So, right, this has been clear from a trend, from a path perspective that we face in this direction. And so what we need is we need tools that we can work with that help us to turn inwards, that help us to find peace, that help us to cultivate silence in the face of this chaos and adversity. So one of my favorite philosophers is Friedrich Nietzsche. So Nietzsche was a German philosopher, and he went crazy just before the turn of the 20th century. So in the late 1890s, I think, the common thing is that he had syphilis. But before that, he was one of the most brilliant philosophers. And he came up with this idea that God is dead. Right? And this concept of God being dead means that, again, going back to the Ragnar story, these gods that we've supposedly given power to, who we pray to, who we have rituals for, are really just a projection of our own internal divinity. Right? So there's these gods that we create so that we can come together in community, so that we have rituals around them. This is what Nietzsche spoke about. And then essentially with the scientific method, that science would replace God. Or traditional, especially the traditional Christian concept of God. Science would replace it. And Nietzsche predicted that as a result of that, nihilism, this concept of where do we find meaning, where do we find purpose, why are we all here, nihilism would sweep through Western culture in the 20th century, leading to World War I, World War II, leading to the climate crisis, leading to the mental health crisis. All of this is a concept of we've lost meaning, we've lost purpose, why are we here? And so within that framework, Nietzsche invented this concept of the Ubermensch. And the Ubermensch is this process of becoming, right? It's an ideal figure, sort of a cultural vanguard, if you will, that will help to reinfuse spirituality into culture itself. It will help to reinfuse this concept of divinity, that we are our own gods, as Gnosticism often talks about, and help that to become the defining way in which we live. So back to the Ragnar story, right? The Ragnar clip, he has fully taken responsibility for his path. And that comes with incredible freedom and incredible expansion. And it also comes with an incredible burden. Because you can't have this full concept of freedom without also having the willingness to take on the suffering and the burden that comes from. So back to Nietzsche's concept of the Ubermensch. The question that I would encourage you to think about through this webinar is, how can psychedelics be used as manifestors to help us dive into our inner divinity and then fully allow that to emerge over the course of our existence, right? How can psychedelic use be integrated to wake us up to that idea and then be continued to basically worked with through developing a skill so that we continue to go on with that process. So I want to give you a little bit of context as to how I do that, the specifics of that. What is my container for microdosing? What is my container for psychedelic use? Because that will allow you to better understand the scaffolding in which that's placed. And before we get into that, this is just a little bit of how I think about peak performance for the soul, right? The path of personal mastery. What is optimization? The Ubermensch. which we already spoke about. And essentially, this path of becoming is a process of refining the core of who we are, the essence of who we are, peak performance for the soul. So what is my current container for microdosing? One thing to emphasize, I have a few notes here that I want to go off. One thing to emphasize is that this is my process for microdosing. This is in alignment with my goals. And I'm sharing this as an example of how you can personalize microdosing for your own path of growth, development, and becoming. And keep in mind that this is an ongoing interactive process to customize microdosing to your life and goals. This isn't just a one-time prescriptive protocol. This is a skill that you'll continue to develop over time. So, in terms of my path with microdosing, I'll do the full recount about how this is developed and what I've included with microdosing as part of my own path towards greater freedom, mastery, self-expression, creation, et cetera, et cetera. So I first began microdosing a little over 5 years ago. This was back when I was living in Budapest. In fact, when I sort of came up with the idea of third wave as a concept, it's about the same time that I started microdosing psychedelics. I did LSD twice a week for about 7 months is what it ended up being. And as you can already tell, that was much different than the initial Fatima protocol, which is twice a week for 5 weeks. So already when I jumped into microdosing, I did it differently than before. Now, partly that was just because I like taking acid quite a bit. It was a great medicine. It was super euphoric. It helped as an antidepressant. And I was also just in a phase in my life where I was 24 at the time, 24, 25. I was willing to take a lot of risks and felt like just continuing to do it again and again and again would be useful and helpful. And it was at that point. And then at the end of those 7 months, I stopped microdosing. It took maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months off. And then when I picked microdosing back up, it would usually be I would do it once or twice a week for a month to 6 weeks to 8 weeks and just sort of see how things developed through that process and through that time period. Now, it wasn't until late 2016, early 2017 that I started to recognize what microdosing would be most useful for in my own life. And that's because I started to do a lot of public speaking. So I did a speaking tour in about 12 different cities and noticed that microdosing was extremely helpful at communicating what I needed to communicate, at getting up on stage, at having the confidence, at being able to explain these sort of tricky and intricate concepts that I wanted to explain about the intersection of microdosing, peak performance, career choice, healing, some of these things. So then what I started to do is instead of microdosing twice a week, just to see how that protocol went and developed, what I did is I ended up just microdosing every now and then when I thought it was necessary, sort of spot microdose. This was early 2017. Then in August 2017, I moved to New York City. And for any of you who have either spent time in New York City or lived in New York City, you likely know how stressful of a place it is. It's super intense. The energy is super dense. And so I noticed that as soon as I got there, because I tend to be more sensitive to energy, I started to become anxious without the microdosing. And then anytime I would microdose with LSD, I would get more anxious. So because the current container of my life at that time was already fairly anxious, because I was living in New York, I had to totally cut out microdosing for about a year and a half. So from early 2017 to, I would say, early 2019, I microdosed sparingly. Like I would microdose if I went upstate and I went hiking for the day, or I would microdose if I was leaving New York and going anywhere else. So I did a number of trips to Amsterdam in 2018 because I was setting up synthesis at that point. But whenever I was actually physically in New York City, I basically could not microdose because there was too much anxiety from that experience. So in 2019, May 2019, I left New York and I moved to Oakland, California. Now, when I moved to Oakland, California, because I was in a much more green area, I was actually in Berkeley, so Berkeley and then Oakland. It was really easy to get outside, to get to the redwoods, to do that whole thing. And so I noticed that, okay, now that I'm in a less stressful situation, I have a better container for it, I can start microdosing mushrooms again. But I did not want to go back to LSD because my experience with microdosing LSD as of late had been anxiety. Right? The couple times that I tried to microdose LSD while in New York, it just instantly shot my cortisol through the roof. I went into a sympathetic state. It was hard to focus. I was distracted. It was hard to sleep. And so I had a little bit of sort of residual trauma from those experiences microdosing LSD. So when I moved to Oakland, I started to be on a protocol where I would microdose with mushrooms 3 times a week. And that's because I heard about Paul Stamets' protocol, doing it 4 times a week. I didn't really want to do it that often, but I thought, hey, getting into a rhythm with microdosing psilocybin has anti-inflammatory properties. It helps me to remain more present and engaged, more mindful. I will combine it with meditation. And so when I moved to Oakland, I decided to microdose 3 times a week. So that gives you a little bit of context of how I think about microdosing. But of course, microdosing is only one element of an entire sort of protocol for holistic wellness. The other elements are your well-being fundamentals. So those are things like diet, exercise, and sleep. Your mindfulness practice, which is super important. What mindfulness practice do you have when you are microdosing? And then having a coach or a therapist or a guide or a psychiatrist or someone who is there to support you through your process of healing and transformation. So as of late, I've been working with a couple coaches, and I just want to share a couple systems that I've set up that will help better to explain how I'm microdosing at this point in time, so August 2020, what container that's happening in, what are some habits that I have in place, what is the calendar that I have set up. I just want to walk through that for a little bit so you can have a better understanding of the scaffolding that I'm using for my microdosing protocols. Slides. So this is my current container for microdosing. And this is a sort of this is my evening trackable spreadsheet that I have every day. So essentially, at the beginning of every month, I do a monthly review, and I look at what are the habits, what are some of the things that are fundamental to my well-being, and how can microdosing be integrated to ensure that I follow through on these things consistently. So every day, at the end of the day, I do a daily review, and it's usually just during the weeks. It's not on the weekends necessarily. And I fill this out. And so as you can see, a few things in there, no phone distractions before noon. I think that's so huge. If you're picking up your phone first thing in the morning, you're immediately going into reactive state. That kills creativity. So if you're interested in microdosing to have a better start to your days, it's so important that you honor a morning routine and that you minimize your phone distractions in the morning. So that's the first one that I have, no phone distractions before noon. The second one that I started to build in is every morning I'll do a 15 to 30 minute awareness meditation. It's so interesting. You know, when I first started doing psychedelics 10 years ago, I was meditating really consistently. In fact, I started meditating as a result of doing psychedelics. Many of you can probably also relate to that. And then for whatever reason, like a few years ago when I moved to New York, it was intense. I stopped meditating consistently, and I've only done it like sparingly here and there the last few years. And then I've been working with a coach, and about 2 months ago, we started looking at, okay, what are the things that need to be integrated, and meditation was key. So every morning I wake up and I do a 15 to 20 to 25 minute awareness meditation just to help stay present in silence in my experience of being. And that just helps me to start every day in a responsive, open, compassionate state. I then have been doing a morning read. I typically in the morning will like to read literature, philosophy, poetry, because that tends to be more engaging. So right now I'm reading Joseph Conrad, who was a writer at the turn of the 19th century. I love to read Nietzsche. Nassim Taleb is one of my favorite modern philosophers. I have a few science fiction stories as well that I'll read towards the evening more so, but morning reads are more for like heavy, dense. The Tao Te Ching is another one that I'll read in the morning. Heavy, dense things. Every morning I journal. So usually 3 pages, long-handed, where I'll get up and I'll journal. And it's a way to just get the creative process moving, no judgment, just get things out on paper, see how things move, and do 3 pages for that. And then I tend to get into my creative block. I'm going to explain that when I go into the calendar function next year. And that creative block is every morning I try to work on my most important task for 2 hours every day. And just set that aside and go into it. Supplements are a big part of that. So every morning I take rhodiola, which is an adaptogen. I take a prebiotic and probiotic. I use seed, which is a type of supplement. And then I also will go ahead and take a medicinal mushroom supplement. And then throughout the day, I also take organs. I take fish oil. I take athletic greens, creatine, collagen protein, and sometimes whey protein. So I will do quite a bit of supplementation to support my overall health and well-being. I intermittent fast. So fasting is a huge part of that. I don't eat every morning, usually until 11 or 12, and I try to minimize any food at night, so not eating past 8 p.m. at night. Every day, more or less, I train. I've been training with a mixed movement arts group here in Miami, doing yoga, mobility, movement, and then I also have a bike that I take everywhere around Miami, so I don't have a car, I'm only biking and going everywhere around. And then at the end of the day is my daily review. I try to hit inbox 0 for the email, although that doesn't usually work, and then phone away by 8:30, which, as you can see there, sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. So this is more or less my total scaffolding for how I think about my daily habits, my daily routines, the things that are supporting my nourishment and my well-being. So this is really in the weeds, but I think it'll give you a context and a sense for how I think about integrating microdosing into everything that I'm doing.
And then the last thing to be aware of, let's see if I can get the next slide, is a Google Calendar function that I use. Again, this is something I set up with one of the coaches that I worked with, where essentially at the beginning of our coaching program, he said, look, to make sure that you're keeping a tight idea of your schedule and how you're spending time every day, it's important that you plan your weeks in advance and set out a calendar for the week. And that if you're planning those weeks in advance, you don't necessarily need to stick to that, but if you change anything throughout the day, you go back and adjust it. And it's essentially a sort of meditation. so I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so you can see some of the details. Can I zoom in? Looks like I can't zoom in. I thought I could zoom in. But if you can kind of like get up and close here, you can see like in the morning, I have tea, meditation, sometimes breath work, movement, reading, journaling, right? I have all that set off. I have a creative block that I set aside. I have meal times set aside in the afternoons. I have email, my personal tasks, calls, et cetera, et cetera. Training is also in here. So there's a lot of things that I will integrate into the calendar into my everyday routine.
So that gives you a little bit more of a scaffolding in which to think about how are you integrating microdosing into your personal routine. What are the other things that you're doing in combination with microdosing? What is your calendar, whether that's on a weekly or monthly basis in terms of how you're going about with microdosing? And then the other thing that I want to mention are just a few other cool tools and tricks that I use as part of my microdosing routine and as part of these. The first one is called the Oura ring, and that's the ring that I'm wearing right now. It's O-U-R-A. And the Oura ring tracks and measures your heart rate variability. It tracks and measures your deep sleep, your REM sleep, a number of other things that will help you to have a great night of sleep. And what this does is it allows you to see as you're like starting a microdose, or as you're taking out microdosing, or as you're going to bed earlier, or as your whatever other sort of adjustments and tweaks you want to make throughout your day, you actually have something that tracks and measures. And from what I can tell, this is the most accurate one that's available for sleep. And sleep is so key to well-being. It's so fundamental to well-being. A few other things that I use. One is called the Apollo. So the Apollo is a wearable device that vibrates. You can find that at Apollo Neuro, and that's a cool wearable technology. And then the other one is called Brain.fm. And Brain FM is this cool little thing where it's sort of like binaural beats, and I use that in combination with microdosing for flow states and creativity. So those are basically most of the tools that I use. The last thing that I want to talk about before we get into our announcement about Third Wave's membership site is going to be, hold on, I'm going to start the presentation again. Whoops, that'll come in a sec. One sec. So the last thing I want to talk about is just the benefit of having a coach. So we've already talked about sort of the high level metaphysical, philosophical element of freedom, expression, determining your own fate, being able to sort of manifest and become a magician about where it is that you want to head in your existence. Then I started to break it down a little bit more into my own path of personal mastery, the steps that I've taken, how that path, that odyssey has sort of weaved itself into my existence these last 10 years. And then I went into the nitty gritty of my current container, including the habits, including my diet, exercise, sleep. What are all the things that I'm doing to support my microdosing protocol to ensure that I have energy, vitality, creativity, and a sense of purpose in the things that I'm doing. And the last part of this that we haven't talked a lot about, but a huge part of developing this skill with microdosing, of developing this skill with psychedelics, is having a coach, a therapist, a guide with you to support you on that process of learning about your experience. So as a couple examples of this, we just went through a 6-week microdosing experience program. In fact, we talked about this on the last webinar. So 50 people enrolled in our microdosing experience program. It was a phenomenal cohort. We guided them through 2 weeks of preparation, a breathwork ceremony, and 4 weeks of integration coaching with microdosing. We had a 6-week curriculum, so we guided them through, setting their new North Star, vulnerability, accountability, eliminating distractions, and we helped create a container so they could understand how they could best work with microdosing for those needs, for their needs. So if you're continuing to think about how do I continue to tweak and adapt microdosing to my specific needs, my number one recommendation is to find a coach to work with, to find a therapist who knows a lot about microdosing or psychedelics to work with, or to enroll in some sort of group coaching program like we've had. Now, we won't be opening our group coaching program for at least another 4 weeks. So we're processing the last cohort. We'll do the 6-week program again in early to mid-September. But what we do have is we do have one-on-one microdosing coaches who are currently available, who you can purchase one-on-one calls with as part of your microdosing course. And that's the big thing that I wanted to announce at the end of today's webinar, because we're about reaching the hour mark, so I want to transition into Q&A fairly soon, is here at the Third Wave, we're rolling out an entire new membership platform. So in the past, for any of you who have already purchased our microdosing course, who have enrolled in our programs, we hosted the course on Thinkific, we had the forum somewhere else, and then we have our website, the Third Wave itself. So we had it in sort of a few disparate spots. And what we've done with our current program is we've integrated it all into Third Wave and the Third Wave website. So essentially, the big sort of announcement for this 5-year anniversary is our entire new membership site. And that comes with a renovated, updated course curriculum. We shot 40 new videos about microdosing. We have about a 90-page curriculum that we've renovated and rolled out that has all the most up-to-date information about microdosing, about how to combine microdosing with all these other things that we talked about today for optimal well-being. We also have several coaches who, once you're in our dashboard, you can purchase access to do one-on-one calls with an experienced microdosing coach to guide you through this. And then most importantly,
we have a forum and a community support. And that's built into our membership site and membership platform for Third Wave. It's a forum, and if you purchase access to our course and our curriculum, you will get access to that private forum where you can connect with microdosers from all over the world. So as a way to celebrate Third Wave's 5-year anniversary, as a way to celebrate everything that's been going on with psychedelics, I mean, they're sort of, they're definitely being streamlined for medical use to treat PTSD, depression. They're being decriminalized in many cities. The psychedelic renaissance, the Third Wave, is definitely hitting a crest point. And so to celebrate all of that, we are doing a special product launch for our community, for those of you who are attending the webinar today. And that's essentially, you get access to our brand new membership platform, which includes the renovated course, 40 new videos, private membership forum, and also access to our coaches. You can sign up for one-on-one coaching if you think you will need that. And all of this is to help you personalize and upgrade your microdosing protocol so you can become the fullest expression of yourself. So you can accelerate your path towards mastery, like we talked about at the beginning of the webinar, to ensure that you're continuing to turn inwards and to honor what it is that you really need to feel nourished and supported as you continue on your own personal journey.
So I just want to make that offer live. Again, that's Microdosing 2.0. That's our Microdosing Course 2.0. And if you join today, you'll save $50 from the regular price. So the price today is $97 and the regular price is $147. And we'll get into Q&A here in a little bit. But I just want to make sure that if there are any questions about that, so we've already enrolled 2,500 students in our microdosing course, 40 new videos, completely renovated curriculum, private forum. There's a 10-day money-back guarantee, and the price currently is $97. And we'll keep this special launch price for 1 week in total. So until August 16th, which also happens to be my 30th birthday. Say that, I'm a Leo, yes. So we'll keep this open until August 16th, and then the price will bump up to what we will have it normally at, which is $147. So if you're interested in enrolling in our program, if you're interested in upgrading and personalize your microdosing experience, if you're interested in becoming a master of your own path and cultivating the skill of microdosing, then we would love to see you in the Microdosing Course 2.0. So I'm going to leave this up here. It'll be available as long as we want, basically until we end the webinar today. We'll also send out a few emails about it over the next week so that you can make sure that you get access to it. And like I said, it'll be available for another week before that special deal is up. So that's the Microdosing 2.0. And then what I want to do is I want to go into Q&A. So we're going to start to transition into the questions that we have. So I can see what they are. Hold on, I need to pull up the moderator panel. So we're having a lot of questions come in. I will make sure that all of the questions get answered. 1 second. Nia, if you could just go ahead and delineate which ones are the questions that we want, and then we'll go ahead and get into it. So guys, we'll do a little bit of Q&A here at the end. So if you have questions about microdosing, if you have questions about personalizing and upgrading your experience, if you have questions about the offer itself, this is a great chance
to make those questions known. And then we'll get into it in a second here. Maria, could you just help out with the questions? I just want to make sure that I cut them. Okay, so the questions are going to be here. So the questions.
All right. And you want me to read all of them?
Yeah, start with this one.
Okay.
We'll start with the bottom ones.
The bottom ones, yeah. All right. So Ross is asking, in terms of customizing protocols, sorry, I just scrolled. In terms of customizing protocols, what substances do you think are optimal for what purposes?
Good question, Ross. So in terms of customizing protocols, which substances are optimal for which purposes? So for anything that's creative, anything that is external, anything that is you're really looking to get in the flow state, a lot of people find that LSD is ideal for that. It can be a little bit like playing with fire because it's very stimulating. So if you struggle with anxiety, you're going to want to minimize that. I think for emotional healing and for things that are more internal, psilocybin mushrooms are better for more emotional, internal healing things. And then one that I'd love to play with, but I haven't had a chance yet, is microdosing San Pedro. And San Pedro has a lot of anti-inflammatory impact. So I think it could be great for holistic wellness. It sort of has the best elements of microdosing LSD because it tends to be more stimulating, but it's also very embodied like mushrooms because it's a plant medicine. So if you can get access to San Pedro, that appears to be the best option.
Danny wants to know, how about microdosing while taking Prozac?
So in terms of if you have any specific questions about the intersection of microdosing and pharmaceutical medications, Jim Fadiman's website, microdosingpsychedelics.com. Nia, if you could put a link to that, please. Microdosingpsychedelics.com. That has a list of all the prescriptions that are okay to take while microdosing. Typically, what SSRIs do, and I'm not a medical doctor and this is not medical advice, but typically what SSRIs do is they blunt the impact of microdosing. So people who are already on antidepressants will usually have to increase the level that they're taking until they've redeveloped some level of sensitivity to the microdoses.
Marin Winkle wants to know, how can we personalize the experience to suit our needs?
So how can we personalize the experience to suit our needs? I think that's as simple as listening to yourself, listening to your intuition. There's always an initial period that you have to go through where you might be microdosing twice a week, or 3 times a week, or 4 times a week. It's part of that generic protocol. But what we want to get to is not having anything externally prescribed, but learning about the process as we start to develop that relationship with the medicine. So in terms of personalizing that, it could be once a week, it could be 3 times a week, it could be once every 2 weeks, it could be once every month. It's hard to say unless I have full context about what you need, and that's why we're offering coaching, because a coach will help you with understanding that process. A coach will help you with, okay, how often do I need to microdose? What other things can we integrate with microdosing to ensure that it's as optimal as possible?
Carrie would like to know, can you drink alcohol or use cannabis when microdosing?
So Carrie wants to know, can you drink alcohol or use cannabis while microdosing? Yes, of course. What you just have to remain mindful of is that's another variable that's being integrated into it. So it could, for example, drinking alcohol. And to be honest, I've had some phenomenal experiences, like taking microdoses to mini doses and drinking some wine with friends and really connecting. So that can be totally great. It just depends on your goals and your needs. So yes, drinking, yes, cannabis, totally okay. Obviously, neither of those are ideal for optimal well-being, for sleep quality, but I'm a pretty heavy cannabis user myself. I also microdose quite a bit, and that's just the vice that I currently have in my life. So if that's the case for you, the best thing to do, and you want to minimize it or get rid of it, is to just continue to have space from it, to continue to have a relationship with it, to not get too sucked into it, and to love yourself. in the process, to realize that we all have our vices and our struggles. And, that's totally okay. And that's totally part of what we're all doing.
Benjamin is asking for suggestions for converting dried mushrooms to microdoses.
So if we want to convert dried mushrooms to microdoses, then essentially what you need is a grinder. So take the dried mushrooms, put them in a grinder, create the homogeneous mixture, and then you'll have the microdoses that you can integrate. Are there any questions about the course itself?
Yes. Yeah. Jennifer Rivlin wants to know, does the $97 give access to the membership site, and for how long, if yes? Will there be a monthly fee for the membership site?
Good question, Jen. So the $97 gets you access to the membership site. There's currently no fee for like a monthly fee for access to the membership site. And that also gets you access to the form. In the future, we may roll out some sort of monthly membership fee, but that will be clearly communicated before it takes place. It will be many, many months before we get to that point in time. So for the time being, $97, it gets you access to a completely renovated curriculum, it gets you access to 40 new videos, it gets you access to a private membership forum. All of that is lifetime access. I also know there was another question about how the Microdosing course before was listed as $47, and that's because that was all the old curriculum. So that was the old videos, the slides, that was hosted elsewhere. What we've done is we've totally updated the curriculum. We produced a bunch of new videos, coaching packages available, the membership form inside. So this whole new rollout of basically third wave 2.0. And that's why we've seen the price increase from $47 to $97. And then after this special 1 week launch period, it will go from $97 to $147.
Some more about the course. Alex wants to know if the course includes dose recommendations for microdosing with psilocybin truffles instead of mushrooms.
Yes, so we have a specific section on what to remain mindful of if you're looking to microdose psilocybin truffles, and those are obviously slightly different than mushrooms. A, because the truffles often come wet, so there's a special process to prepare them to make sure that they're good for that. And then B, the truffles have a different potency of psilocybin compared to psilocybin mushrooms. So yes, there are details and context about that in the course itself.
Jane would like to know, does one become a certified coach after the 6-week course?
So Jane, that's a great question. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, the 6-week microdosing experience program. That is not a coaching certification. We will at some point, likely in October, roll out a specific certification for professionals who want to integrate microdosing into their service, into their contribution. But at this point in time, everything we're offering is really for the individual who is looking to microdose. And I would say if you're a therapist or doctor or psychiatrist or coach or guide or healer or anything else where this might be useful, you can enroll in the course as well today to get access to the wisdom, the insight, the knowledge. And then when we roll out the coaching certification likely in October, you can sign up at that point for more specific certification.
If I take the course, will I receive a personalized microdosing protocol, dosing and days on, off?
Yes, so as part of the course, like I mentioned earlier, this includes Third Wave's very own Microdosing Protocol. It's essentially a 1-month protocol that we outline. This is what to do on microdose day 1. This is what to do on microdose day 2. This is what to do on microdose day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, all the way to day 10. And we have that specific customized protocol in our course so that you can get access to it. Mm-hmm.
All right. How much does the coaching add on to the cost?
So the coaching add-on is $297. So the course itself is $97, and then to get access to 3 one-on-one coaching calls, it's in total $297.
I want to reiterate, how long is the membership for $97?
So the membership for $97 is lifetime access. And if we roll out a monthly fee in the future, we will communicate that beforehand. But in terms of what you get access to now, that's completely free for
Is there any chance to get the recording of this webinar again?
Yes, so we'll do some brief edits because there was some back and forth, and obviously we had a few technical issues in the beginning of the webinar, but we will certainly upload the webinar replay afterwards and send out a link to it so that you can also watch this replay.
Now it's more specific about microdosing in general. Yeah, cool. How do you set up, Jess wants to know, how do you set up your microdose when doing intermittent fasting?
So when I microdose with intermittent fasting, that's always a microdose first thing in the morning, usually with the prebiotic, probiotic, the adaptogen. Right now I'm taking rhodiola, and medicinal mushrooms. And I'll microdose in combination with that in the morning, and then usually not eat till 12 or 1.
Mojo wants to know if there's information about how active components in mushrooms interact with Parkinson's disease medicine. Where can we get such information? And 2, if there's specific information on using psilocybin for healing rather than long-term dependent use. Thanks.
So in terms of Parkinson's, the best resource that I can point you to is the role of iboga and ibogaine in helping to treat Parkinson's. There's been some interesting research that's been done by a man named Dana Beal, D-A-N-A-B-E-A-L. So Dana Beal has done some interesting research on how iboga and ibogaine can help with Parkinson's. That is not information included in the course itself, but you can find it in Google. In terms of, do we provide information about healing in the course itself? Yes, absolutely. We have an entire section on how can microdosing be used for healing, and then what are the other modalities that need to be integrated so that there isn't a high level of dependency on microdosing, but that we're finding the perfect balance between microdosing, higher doses, and mindfulness practices to continue to stay clean and present and aware of the needs that we have for nourishment and well-being.
Benjamin would like to know if you can speak about using microdosing as a buildup to a macrodose.
So what's the relationship between microdosing and macrodosing? So at the beginning of the webinar, I talked about how microdosing is a bridge between sort of mainstream normative culture and the profound transcendent experiences that some or many of us have gone through with ayahuasca or Pedro or high doses of mushrooms. And so the way that I think about that relationship between microdosing and macrodosing is in 2 ways. So as a build-up to microdosing can help you better develop the skill, so to say, of how this medicine impacts you. So one thing that I talked about, for example, in the 6-week course that we just guided people through, is you want to find your minimum effective dose for microdosing and sort of your maximum effective dose. And your minimum effective dose is an amount that you take where you're still noticing a slight elevation of mood, a little more focus, a little better creativity. Your maximum amount is when you definitely feel it. So it's a little bit more than a microdose, but you can still sort of weave it into your everyday existence without being totally distracted or being totally giggly or having too much anxiety, right? Sort of like, that's the range that you want to find. And then once you've found that range, then I would recommend taking a break from all microdosing for at least a week, right? So a break from all microdosing for at least a week before you go into your high dose experience. And then after you've had a high dose experience, waiting, I would say 3 to 4 days before you restart your microdosing protocol. And then typically with high dose experiences, they'll be so sort of shifting and like get you that sort of 50,000 foot view and everything, that once you've had that 50,000 foot view and everything,
You can set that new North Star, and then microdosing consistently as part of that process will help you to continue towards that path that you've set with this new North Star.
How many weeks can I microdose?
How many weeks?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how many weeks can I microdose? That depends on you. So some people start microdosing and never stop microdosing, and they just continue to microdose. Some people, like myself, I microdose twice a week for 7 months, so that would be about 30 weeks, 31 weeks in total that I microdose. I would say the general, like what we talk about in our course, which is the third wave protocol, is to microdose for about a month in total. And then after you've microdosed for a month, like give it a minimum of a month that you're microdosing. And then after a month, reevaluate your baseline, understand how things have changed, and then make an intentional decision about whether you want to continue microdosing.
So a couple people have asked similar questions. I'm going to try to summarize them together. Does your dose have to be exact? I've been doing it informally, just dropping it into smoothies. What is the best way to ingest it? And then the other question that's similar to that is, does adding your microdose of mushrooms into your morning smoothie impact its efficacy for that dose?
So there's a couple questions here. One is the combination of microdosing with smoothies. So what I would always encourage you to do is to microdose on an empty stomach. Right? To give it the first 30 to 40 minutes by itself. You can take a few other supplements with it if you feel called, but to not throw a microdose into the smoothie, it's going to affect the absorption and the ability for the body to work with it. So always take a microdose on an empty stomach, and then give it, like I would say, 30 to 40 minutes until you actually take a smoothie. In terms of the precision of the dose, I will leave that up to you. I just find that the more precise the dose levels are, the easier it is to understand how different levels impact me. So I know that if I take 0.1 grams of mushrooms, I'll feel about this way. If I take 0.3 grams of mushrooms, I'll feel about this way. And so that level of precision is just important because it helps to inform my intention for the microdosing day that I have. Because if I have a day where I'm much more extroverted and much more out in the world and much more socializing, I will tend to do a little bit more. Whereas if I have an internal day of meditation and quiet and reading, I'll do a bit less. And there are other various ways that I work with that. So I find having a pretty good idea of how much you're taking is incredibly beneficial and will lead you, it's sort of like, it will basically help you to better cultivate the skill of working with psychedelics. Because I find that intuition is great, intuition is important, and it is helpful to have some numbers and data so that we're not just fooling ourselves about what we're experiencing, but we have some sort of objective measurement to confirm our suspicions or assumptions or conclusions.
Does your course address high dose experiences?
So the course addresses a little bit of context about high dose experiences. The majority of it is about microdosing, but towards the end of the course, we address what's the relationship between microdosing and macrodosing. If you're now ready for a higher dose, what are the resources to look into? How might you prepare a little bit for that? But most of the course focuses on microdosing. We will, in the next few months, be rolling out an entire new course and program called Becoming Whole, which will get deeper into the specifics of working with higher doses of psychedelics. But for now, most of our premium course material focuses on how to work with microdoses of psychedelics.
If you purchase the first course, do you need to upgrade to access the new course?
So if you already purchased the course, you do not need to upgrade to access the new course. What you can do is you can now get a login, and that will get you access to the dashboard, and you can get access to the coaching page as a result of that. But if you've already purchased the microdosing course, consider this as an update that you get access to because you already purchased it.
So a couple people have asked this. I don't know if you can actually answer it though. What is the best way of getting safe access to mushrooms and microdoses?
Yeah, this question always comes up. How do we get the drugs? So this is, I would say, one of the benefits of having our private forum is there are a lot of other microdosers who are involved and engaged in that forum. So there have been some discussions about sourcing in there. We also have in the course itself some guidance on legal jurisdictions, on Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, just other ways to sort of work through and around the system, so that if there's someone who needs to acquire substances, you can sort of help hold your hand in that process. Obviously, we don't provide substances themselves, so we can't give you access to microdoses of substances, but we do provide a lot of support in that process to make it as streamlined as possible if that's something that we need help with.
Okay. Is there anything with microdosing and irregular heart rhythms?
The question is there anything with microdosing and irregular heart rhythms? I don't know. So, microdosing does obviously have an impact on the heart. If you have heart issues, be mindful of your caffeine intake while you're microdosing, because that's going to be a good thing to be aware of and be mindful of. But I would say the best answer to that is I don't know, and it's better to check with a medical professional.
A couple of people have asked this. What are the best type of mushrooms to enhance focus, mental clarity, and productivity?
So in terms of the best types of mushrooms to use, I've found, and I've almost exclusively microdosed with golden teachers, and I found a lot of efficacy with that. People will also microdose with penis envy. The penis envy are quite a bit stronger than your usual cubensis. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of data and context on that. That's a really good question. It would be something that I want to dive into deeper, but right now I'd say golden teachers and penis envy are two good options.
Have you tried or know anything about mescaline microdosing?
So I talked about this a little bit in terms of mescaline microdosing. So mescaline is the main ingredient in San Pedro and peyote, and mescaline, from my perspective, combines sort of both the best worlds between LSD and psilocybin, because it has the more stimulating creative effects of something like LSD, but ideally, and I would say probably microdose with San Pedro, not mescaline necessarily, but ideally if you're microdosing with San Pedro, then it also has the sort of plant medicine embodied element of psilocybin mushrooms.
How long should be the waiting period between microdosing and a plant medicine ceremony?
So in terms of a waiting period between microdosing and plant medicine ceremonies, I'd say always check with your provider, always check with the person who you're doing ceremony with, because they will likely have more specific recommendations for you. If you don't have necessarily a professional person, I would say give it at least 1 week. So take a full week off of microdosing before you're going into a higher dose ceremony, because you will have, if you've been microdosing for some time, you'll have sort of created a bit of sensitivity or lack of sensitivity around the substance. So you want to have a clean break before you dive into the high dose experience.
Mm-hmm. Psilocybin has a shorter half-life than LSD. Could I microdose psilocybin twice a day to compensate for that?
So the question is, psilocybin has a shorter half-life than LSD. It's 6 hours compared to, psilocybin lasts for about 6 hours. LSD lasts for about 12 hours. Can I microdose psilocybin twice to make up for that? And I would say it won't really make a difference, because with both substances, there are short-term tolerance. So if you microdose with psilocybin and you try to microdose again in 6 hours, you're not really going to feel much of an effect. So the answer to that is basically no. If you want something that's going to last for 12 hours, I would say look at microdosing San Pedro for all of the reasons that I previously mentioned.
What doses for San Pedro microdosing?
So in terms of the dose levels to use for San Pedro microdosing? That's not a question that I know actually completely off the top of my head. We have a guide to San Pedro microdosing on our website, which Nia, if you could pull it up and post a link to our Microdosing San Pedro guide, that will provide a little bit more context and details about the specifics of microdosing for San Pedro.
Do you have any suggestions for a kit to test LSD?
So in terms of suggestions for drug testing kits, for LSD in particular, we have partnered with an excellent organization called Bunk Police, B-U-N-K Police, Bunk Police, and they offer phenomenal test kits for testing your LSD. So that would be something that you can check out by going to Bunk Police.
If you could reiterate if coaching was part of the membership program.
So the one-on-one coaching is not part of the membership program. For $97, that gets you access to the course, it gets you access to the forum, it gets you lifetime access to the videos, the totally updated curriculum, third ways barrier and microdosing protocol. But if you want to add coaching in addition to that, that will be an additional $297.
And for the course, and is that personalized in terms of the dosing and scheduling?
So the course provides the context through which to think about how you can personalize your protocol. So by going through the course, you will be able to create your own customized protocol with microdosing. That's a core component of what we want to teach you, because again, I think of our course as an educational process, as an educational container. And essentially, by enrolling in the course, we're helping you to develop the skill of how you work with microdoses of psychedelics to have more energy, to be more creative, to minimize anxiety, to overcome depression, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Jesse would like to know, does macrodosing occasionally have a similar effect to microdosing frequently?
So the question is, does macrodosing occasionally have a similar effect to microdosing every so often? Yes and no. I would say yes in that, like if microdosing is sort of seeing the mountain peak and the mountaintop, then microdosing gives you sort of a glimmer of that, but not the entire picture. And there are certain insights that can only be gleaned through that macrodose experience, like profound insights that you come to. Whereas with microdosing, it's more as like you're chipping away at things. You're making it easier for yourself to adapt on an ongoing basis, but you're not necessarily going to get the same level of profundity from consistently microdosing as you will if you have the full macrodose. So that's why it's like yes, somewhat, but also no, because the macrodosing experience is fundamentally different than the microdosing experience.
Can you explain what San Pedro is?
San Pedro is a cacti from the Andes. It's something that the indigenous people who have lived in the Andean mountains have been using for thousands of years. And the active ingredient in San Pedro, the main psychoactive ingredient, is mescaline.
What about combining microdosing with caffeine? What are your experiences?
So microdosing with caffeine, when I microdose with LSD, I do my best to minimize caffeine. If I'm drinking caffeine on a microdosing LSD day, it's usually matcha, because matcha also has L-theanine, which just allows the experience to be a bit more grounded. You're not getting quite as heavy. What I notice is that if I do espresso with LSD, which I still do from time to time, but if I do espresso with LSD, the energy just sort of shoots straight to my head, and I tend to be anxious and a bit more distractible. So if I'm microdosing with LSD, I try to do it with matcha, something that's more grounding. And then in terms of mushrooms aren't really nearly as stimulating as LSD. So if you want to microdose with mushrooms and have a coffee or have a little bit more caffeine, that's totally okay. I think as a general rule, I always say like minimize the variables that you're sort of throwing in. So you want to be able to see, okay, first, how does microdosing impact me? And then after you clearly developed a relationship with that, potentially throw caffeine in. But again, that's a very personal thing in terms of try it out, see what happens, and sort of adjust.
I'm probably gonna mispronounce this. On mushrooms, microdose better cubensis or cyanosensis?
So the question is cubensis versus cubensis versus cyanosensis. That's again something I don't know a whole ton about. I would say that would be a very personal preference. So experiment with both and see what works best for you.
Somebody kind of wants to have this reiterated. So mushrooms burden the stomach. That's why you take it on an empty stomach with probiotic.
Mushrooms what?
Burden the stomach, like you can feel like stomach cramps.
Oh, so mushrooms can be nauseating. So the question is, why take them on an empty stomach? Mushrooms can be nauseating. So the reason I take it on an empty stomach is because it's just better absorption. So because you're usually consuming it as a supplement with microdoses of mushrooms, you want to give the stomach time to absorb that before you're throwing in a bunch of other calories and things that it needs to process. So I think the question here is, if you get nausea as a result of microdosing, you might want to have a small snack with the microdose, but definitely try to minimize as much other input as possible when you're microdosing with either mushrooms or LSD.
What do you think about micro or macrodosing MDMA? Any tips or comments about it? And how would you compare that to mushrooms?
So microdosing and macrodosing MDMA, there's really no need whatsoever to microdose MDMA. Do not recommend it. Taking MDMA too consistently can create heart issues, can create issues of neurotoxicity. All of the benefits of MDMA can be had in a higher dose. And one of the reasons that people start microdosing with the classic psychedelics like mushrooms and LSD and these other ones is because just jumping into the deep end right away with a high dose of a psychedelic can often be very disorienting and difficult. So a lot of people prefer to microdose first with psychedelic as sort of a way to better, like an onboarding process. But the fact is, if you're doing a high dose of MDMA, right, like the chances of that being difficult or going wrong are very, very small. In fact, that's why MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, chose MDMA as their core substance to treat PTSD, because they knew that it was such a safe and loving and beautiful substance that it's so unlikely that you'll have a difficult experience with it. So there's no need to microdose MDMA whatsoever. If you're going to microdose, do it with the classic psychedelics. If you're going to do MDMA, do a high dose, anywhere from 80 to 120 to 160 milligrams, and make sure that you have an eye shade. You do it somewhere that's safe and comfortable with a playlist, and ideally, if you can, with a guide or a sitter or a therapist to hold space for you.
Does microdosing make permanent changes or only for the period while microdosing?
So the idea with microdosing is to integrate permanent changes into your sense of self over a period of time. And the reason why microdosing helps to do that is because of its impact on neuroplasticity. And that's why in the webinar itself, I emphasize so much the importance of the container, the set and setting in which you microdose, and that's why I gave you my container, right? I talked about the things that I integrate, I talked about my calendar, how I integrate yoga, how I integrate movement, fasting, right? That's the entire container, because I'm using microdosing as a catalyst to make it easier for my sense of self to adapt and change to those new ways of living. Because ideally, you don't want to be dependent on an external substance for feeling great, present, and nourished. But you want to use microdosing as an adjunct to create that opening, to weave in new patterns of behavior that support your healing and transformation over a long period of time.
Microdosing and chronic pain, any info or resources that you would recommend?
So in terms of the intersection between microdosing and chronic pain, there was recently research published about the efficacy of microdosing THC for chronic pain. So I would dive deeper into that. If you just Google microdosing THC chronic pain, I'm sure that research study or news about that research study will pop up. At this point in time, there's no clinical research on the efficacy of microdosing psychedelics for chronic pain. However, we've heard plenty of anecdotal reports and stories, particularly from veterans and people who have PTSD, who have started to microdose of plant medicines and have noticed how it helps them with their chronic pain. So there's clinical research about the efficacy of microdosing cannabis and THC for chronic pain, and there's anecdotal reports of how it's helped people when they're microdosing psychedelics, but no clinical reports yet.
What is the shelf life of psilocybin and LSD in the fridge?
So the shelf life of LSD and psilocybin, so as long as they're in airtight containers and stored in a cool, dark place, you don't necessarily need to store it in a fridge. In the fridge, there's moisture, so you want to be mindful of that. Instead, I would say cool, dark container, making sure it's in something that's airtight, and it can last, LSD will last for years. Psilocybin mushrooms, it's probably closer to 3 to 6 months. So you want to consume them, within that time.
Can you explain the coaching session and what the coaches are like?
Yep. So for the coaching sessions that you can access, it's 3 one-on-ones. Coaching call for preparing for your microdosing experience, coaching call for your microdosing experience itself, and a coaching call for integration. And we have 3 different coaches. One is more oriented towards peak performance and optimization. One is much more oriented towards healing and emotional development, addiction, depression, things like that. And one coach is more oriented towards leadership, mindfulness, presence, awareness, some of these sort of peak performance states that are not as focused on like the data. Those are the 3 coaches that we have, and we are currently in the process of onboarding several more.
For just general well-being and depression, do you recommend any substance more than another? Also, is ketamine good for this purpose? And there was another question related to ketamine. I believe it was just if you have anxiety, do you recommend taking ketamine?
So what is so great about ketamine is that it is a legal alternative right now, and depending on the state that you live in, you can get ketamine shipped to your home as part of that process. So ketamine is very useful for anxiety, higher doses. It can also be very useful for depression. And I think for many people, because it's the only legal option right now, it's the best starting point. There was another part to that question.
If you just recommend, if they're asking if you recommend taking ketamine one time or like once a month for anxiety.
And then in terms of how often to work with ketamine, a lot of people will do it, I would say once, they'll do an initial protocol, like this company that we partner with, Mindbloom. When you sign up for their experience, you get 4 sessions. And I believe you can do those 4 sessions over either like a month, 3 months. It just depends on what it is and how often you want to do this. I would say if you're doing ketamine, max 2 times in a month. And to pick up momentum, do it at least once a month. So between 1 and 2 times a month is a good way to start with ketamine for anxiety or depression.
Which is the most powerful psychedelic, LSD, psilocybin, or DMT? And what would you use DMT for?
So the most powerful psychedelic is something called 5-MeO-DMT, which comes from the Bufo alvarius tea, which is in the desert in Southwest America and northern Mexico. And that is basically a 30 to 45 minute experience. It sends you direct into white light, and it is incredibly profound. Can't really microdose with that. In terms of what that's used for, it's really used for like opening the crown chakra, opening, for total transcendence. And that would be its main use. LSD and psilocybin are not nearly as strong as 5-MeO-DMT.
All right. For the average healthy individual, what is a good time frame of feeling the effects of a microdose?
So for the average healthy individual, what are the time frames for feeling the effects of a microdose? I would say you can feel the effects on day 1. That's certainly possible. If you feel nothing on day 1, you can increase a little bit to see how it feels on day 2. But I would say to honor the process, give yourself a full 30 days from your first microdose to your 10th microdose to gauge and see how things have shifted and changed over that period of time. So what you want to commit to at a minimum is 30 days.
Someone would like to know if you've met someone who has microdosed for years without break.
So someone wants to know if I've have met someone who has microdosed for years without taking a break. I don't personally remember any sort of anecdotes or stories. I'm sure there are people in our course or that I've spoken to before, or maybe, even if they just microdose once in a month. But that, I guess that brings the question, like, how long is a break? Is a break a week? Is a break a month? Is a break 2 weeks? So I would say that just depends on how we're defining what a break is. Because I've been microdosing not consistently, but I've been microdosing for the last 5 years, and I took breaks here and there. But in terms of, if I know anyone who's been microdosing like 2 or 3 times a week for a long period of time, at this point in time, I don't know. Maybe there's someone else in the webinar that can say, hey, I've done it as well, but I don't have any sort of anecdotes to share.
Question about the course. Is the new course $47 or $97 with the special pricing? How long is the special pricing in effect?
So the new course is $97 with the special pricing. It's in effect for 1 week, so until August 16th, and then that price goes up to $147.
How can psychedelics help with addictions, and which would be the best?
So in terms of the relationship between psychedelics and addiction, addiction is often tied to early adverse childhood experiences, early traumatic experiences. And psychedelics, by opening up the subconscious and the unconscious, which are where we store things, allow those traumas to be processed. Allows there's usually a catharsis of that trauma. We can see it, we can integrate it. And that could be for psilocybin. There's been quite a few clinical studies on the efficacy of psilocybin to treat nicotine addiction, to treat alcoholism. And then there's also a substance called iboga and ibogaine that is proving to be very effective to treat opiate addiction. And then there was a lot of research in the 60s about the efficacy of LSD to treat alcoholism and other addictions. So I think regardless of the type of psychedelic that it is, it can be incredibly effective at healing addiction. But again, that must be done in the right setting. It must be done with a therapist or a guide who is experienced at treating early trauma and treating behaviors of addiction.
When microdosing, are you supposed to notice the effects every time? And then they kind of gave their specific dose and that they're not really noticing an effect.
So when microdosing, you're supposed to feel it every time. So the idea with microdosing is that it's sub-perceptible. Ideally, if you're cultivating the skill of microdosing, you sort of learn to teeter right on the edge, where it's just barely sub-perceptible, but you can sometimes teeter up into feeling an enhanced sense of smell, or touch, or vision, or something like that. So if you haven't quite reached that point, you probably want to continue to titrate upwards until you take a little bit too much, and you're like, okay, I know I feel this, it's having an experience, it's having an effect, and then you can go on.
How to handle anxiety coming up while microdosing?
So the question is, how do we handle anxiety that comes up while microdosing? The best way to handle anxiety while microdosing is the microdosing will often potentiate it. So you want to ensure that when you have a microdosing day, if you've experienced this before, you meditate the morning of your microdosing day. I would say that is number one, to meditate the morning of your microdosing day. I would say number two is if you're still feeling anxiety, to microdose in an outdoor setting. So to microdose whether it's a park, to microdose where you can go hiking in nature. If you're microdosing and you're in an office building or you're in an apartment or you're at home, like so many of us are during quarantine, that could cause some enhanced anxiety. So meditate and get outside, get into the woods, get into nature, get into a park. That feeling of expansion will help to minimize the anxiety that's there. And then the third thing to add is journal about it. So if you're microdosing, anxiety is coming up, have a journal that you can longhand write in to start to process what that anxiety is.
Someone's asking if you could please repeat what you said earlier about the Fadman and Stamen protocol. Fadman is best for this, Stamen is best for that, and does it matter which medicine you're microdosing on that schedule or protocol?
So the Fadman protocol, so what's the difference between the Fadman and the Stamen protocol? Just for reiterating some of what I had mentioned earlier on the webinar. So the Fadman protocol is twice a week. And it appears that a lot of people who are using that are doing more so for clinical issues. And that's both with LSD and psilocybin mushrooms. The Stamets protocol is 4 times a week. And the way that he talks about it is exclusively with psilocybin mushrooms. So if you're looking to microdose of LSD, follow the Fadman protocol initially, or even better, enroll in our course and get access to our own protocol, because that's also great for LSD. If you're looking to microdose of mushrooms, depends on why you're microdosing. You could either, if you're doing it for depression or anxiety or clinical issues, Fadman protocol is a good place to start. If you're looking more for wellness and cognitive function, the Paul Stamets protocol 4 times a week is a better place to start.
I think these are the last couple ones. Any comments about using microdosing while doing EMDR?
So comments about the relationship between microdosing and EMDR. EMDR is a type of eye magnetic dissociative resonance, maybe that's what it stands for, that can help you to process trauma. There have been quite a few people that I know that have combined microdosing with EMDR to accelerate results, so that's something worth looking into. I don't have any personal experience with that, so I can't speak to it, but definitely something, again, to test and iterate to see how it works.
When taking LSD or psilocybin, if I were to fall asleep, would I experience lucid dreams, more intense visuals, etc.?
So the question is about the relationship between LSD and psilocybin mushrooms and lucid dreaming. Some people will report that if they microdose before they go to bed, they do have more interesting and visually engaging dreams. I haven't found that to be necessarily true for myself. I've done it a couple times. So again, I feel like, I don't know, is the best response, and test it, iterate, see how it works for you, experiment with it for you. And if you're gonna do that, just be mindful that they're both very stimulating, even if they're taken at a microdose level. So I don't know how easy it is to necessarily get to sleep if you're microdosing right before you go to bed. So if you're looking to do that, take super, super, super small amounts and sort of gauge, have a dream journal and sort of write about what's happening for you during that process.
Can you use Hawaiian wood rose instead of LSD?
So the question is, can you use Hawaiian wood rose, which is also called LSA, instead of LSD? That's definitely a possibility. I don't know what the precise dose level is for a microdose for that, but some people will use Hawaiian stuff, some people will use the seeds to get access to LSA. It has a somewhat similar experience to LSD, but it tends to be a bit more harsh on the stomach and not as easily absorbed.
Does macrodosing Mdma once a month interfere with my psilocybin or LSD microdose?
So the question is, does macrodosing Mdma once a month interfere with microdosing? I would say, I wouldn't say it interferes, but there's definitely going to be a relationship between those two. If you're consuming Mdma at a high dose once a month, and you're integrating microdosing into that, those will play off each other. What you could look to do is to take out microdosing for a little bit, or to take out the macrodose of the Mdma for a little bit, and play around with that. But again, I think that would be largely a matter of experimentation.
And then these last two are just people want it reiterated. If you're already signed up for the Microdosing Course 1.0 or the $5 course, that you're automatically upgraded to the current course.
So if you've already purchased the Microdosing course, you're logged in with Thinkific, some form, you'll be automatically upgraded to the 2.0. This offer is more so for anyone who hasn't purchased any course access yet and wants to start to work with our private forum, recording your videos, all that stuff.
And can you reiterate which substance is best for focus and which is for creativity?
So for focus and creativity, the best substance is LSD. And for emotional well-being, the best substance is going to be psilocybin.
Yeah.
Okay. How many people are still left?
188.
Okay. So we have about 180 of you who are still left in the webinar. I think at one point we had up to 580, which is phenomenal, great attendance. So thank you to all of you who stuck around until the end of the Q&A. As I mentioned already, we'll get this this final video uploaded and then sent out as a replay as well. So I just want to wish all of you a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and let us know if you have any questions about Microdosing 2.0. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, my name is Paul Austin, and I'm the founder and CEO of Third Wave. That's it.
Sweet.
Sweet. Oh my God, it's already 4 o'clock.